What was the intention when you wrote the book? How do I survive? Did you set an intention?
My intention was to take all the wisdom from the many, many people I have worked with, including my own mother, who have experienced child loss, and taking all that wisdom and knowing what worked for people to be able to lead fulfilling lives and put it together in a way that would be easily available for grieving parents to help them in this journey that no one would wish upon another ever. When I started my coaching practice, interestingly enough, I wasn't looking for coaching women of child loss, but they are the ones that showed up on my doorstep, so to speak. And I just knew that that was part of my life purpose, is to help these families and especially moms. There is no pain, I don't believe, that could be greater than the loss of a child.
You are a grief coach and also a certified funeral celebrant.
Basically, there are a lot of people that are non-affiliated with a church or a particular religion. And when someone dies, they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't have a minister, for my family member, my loved one, or they didn't necessarily believe in that and didn't belong to a church. So I go in and I am non-denominational, and my goal is to sit down with the family and create the most beautiful service in honor of their loved one and in honor of them and their grief, because that's their first step in the grief journey, is when they have the whatever service, whether it's a celebration of life or a funeral. So what I do is I take and I learn all about the individual who died, and I create a beautiful ceremony where the family can breathe and feel so cared for, so loved, and start their journey of grief on a good note, that it feels good to them and they feel honored and that their loved one was so loved.
And that also makes me wonder if by doing what you do, you have lost the fear of death, of losing the body.
Oh, yes. I have, and I don't know if you're okay with me telling a little story. When I talked about the epiphany, when I was a little girl, I realized that I had had a brother that died before I was born. No one talked about him. His name, Greg, wasn't spoken in the family. Everything was buried about it. So he died about 6 years before I was born. And once I found out when I was about 6 years old through some curiosity, and I found some old photos, I became very connected with this child, and he wasn't really a child to me in my mind, but I became very connected to him from a spiritual sense. So throughout my life, I have had this deep connection with this brother that I never knew. And so I was flying on a plane coming back from, I used to be a corporate executive in the workers' compensation field, and I was flying back home after a work trip. And I had an epiphany on the plane. And what happened is I felt like I was struck by lightning. I was actually like in my chair in the plane going, what is going on here? Literally felt like I was struck by lightning. And a voice came to me and said, I was born through you. And I knew immediately that this was my brother, that it was my brother, Greg. His birthday was the day before mine. And I always felt this deep connection. The more that I tapped into that relationship with him, I have no fear of dying, because I know that what's on the beyond the veil, the other side, whatever, is just so extraordinarily beautiful. And there is no fear. It's just that we transform. We transform from our physical body into another type of body.
So let's talk about grief for a moment. You wrote something interesting. You said grief is a critical part of the healing process.
Grief to me is love. If we had never loved deeply, we would never grieve. So it is part of that same emotion, this deep grief. And it is a healing process, but there is no end point. because we always love the person who is no longer physically with us. And it's not linear. There isn't a cookie cutter process for grief. It's a roller coaster of emotions. It can get all entangled in all different kinds of emotions. And so, yes, there are studies, that we have the stages of grief, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and absolutely those are stages that go in, but it is up and down and all around. It's like this massive roller coaster of emotions for people. I have a friend who it is 11 years out since her son died, and she did really well for the first 9. And then all of a sudden, year 10 and into the 11th year, it really erupted because things transform and change. And she started looking back in her life and realizing how many years had gone by. And so the deep grief erupted again, and so needed to work through that. So it's a transition, it's transitory. It never goes away, but it softens. It softens, and it's like when we get very harmed and we're cut and bleeding and bruised and go through all of that over time, a gentle scar remains. And that's what I see grief as, is that when people can deal with their grief and be in it and find the tools to help them through it and do healthy grieving, that scar is not as painful, but it's a gentle reminder always of that deep love that always sits in their heart.
So it is possible that people who have lost a child or loved ones to still have joy. So sorrow and joy, they can coexist in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know so many people who have experienced child loss, and they're the ones, as I said, they were my wisdom keepers, and they shared with me, and I could see, and part of that, we talked about life purpose earlier. Those who can step into a life of purpose and use this extraordinary grief and move it into a gift for others, supporting others, loving others, those are the people that they do find joy, and they can smile and laugh and find that joy. And most of them will always say, my loved one would want me to do that. My loved one wouldn't want me to be sitting here in dark clothes and mourning for the rest of my life.